Hi, everybody. So we are here finally to talk about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. And I'm joined by Abby and Jeremy and Richard. Uh, you guys, and so do you guys want to introduce yourself and say hi?
Hi, I'm Abby.
Jeremy, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Richard.
Yep. Well, great. Sorry we ended up having to postpone this, but it just worked out that way. I'm having the internet is very slow for me, so I'm going to try to keep an eye on the comments on the YouTube stream. But if I miss anything, I'm sorry. But I do have the Q&A open, so if anybody wants to ask questions while we're talking, that would be great. Okay. So today we are talking about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Okay. So this is the third, obviously, in the Harry Potter books and slash movies, and I have my little summary. There's a lot going on in this one, so it's a little longer than my last two, so bear with me, but I think it'll help us kind of get on the same page for the discussion. So here we go. So Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban starts out with Harry back at school with Harry back at summer break with the Dursleys. He is provoked by Aunt Marge, who insults his parents, and he blows her up like a balloon and storms out into the street. Luckily, he is picked up by the night bus and taken to stay at the Leaky Cauldron. Everyone is worried about a convicted murderer, Sirius Black, who has escaped from Azkaban prison. The Dementors, devil-like creatures, are looking for him and are patrolling Hogwarts. Sirius, it turns out, was a friend of Harry's parents until he betrayed and killed them. Now he is on the lookout for Harry. Meanwhile, at school, a new Defense of the Dark Arts teacher is on board, named Professor Lupin, and Hagrid has been hired as a care of magical creatures teacher. Draco provokes a hippogriff named Buckbeak and is attacked, which everyone blames on Hagrid. Then spooky things start happening around the castle, including Harry falling off his broomstick in a murky fog during a Quidditch match. Hermione is also using a time turner to go back in time and take extra classes during the year. Eventually, Sirius appears in the Shrieking Shack, and Lupin turns out to be a werewolf. Lupin explains to Harry, Hermione, and Ron that Sirius is innocent and that Peter Pettigrew was actually responsible for Harry's parents' murder. Turns out that Peter has been living as Ron's rat Scabbers for 12 years. Unfortunately, Lupin transforms into a werewolf, and Sirius and Harry are attacked by the Dementors, but Harry sees a man who unleashes a Patronus across the river, but not before Sirius has been captured by the Dementors. Harry and Hermione go back in time with the time turner, Harry and rescue Sirius, who escapes with Buckbeak, and it turns out that the person Harry saw across the river was himself unleashing the Patronus. There you go. So, did I catch everything? Anything that I forgot?
No, I think that's okay. You got everything in the film at least.
Yeah. Okay, so so what were we always sort of start with our sort of basic thoughts on the rewatch, so why don't you start, Richard? What was your sort of basic thoughts on rewatching this film?
Well, my main thought was that it held up a lot better than the first two films. I mean, in the acting was definitely a lot better, particularly from Daniel Radcliffe, and I like the style a lot. The style Alfonso Cuarón brings to it. This kind of a slightly more grim style, but also more inventive, and it kind of feels more grounded as well. I mean, realistic kind of seems like the wrong word, given that this is like a magic story, but that's how it feels, a bit more real world. And he also kind of rearranges the story a bit more. There are more differences between the book and the movie, and so he's able to cut things out and rearrange them to make it flow better in movie style. So it feels a lot better paced than the other two films.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess I'll go next then. Yeah, this was way better, I thought, than the first two films. Way more engaging. It's just more beautiful to look at. I think the story is more interesting. You don't have those long, sort of boring sections. And yeah, I just thought the acting was better. It's just a better story as far as a movie story. Yeah, I don't know. What about you? What about you, Abby?
I agree. There was a definite shift in tone in this one. The first two had some serious and dark, kind of scary things going on in them, but they were softened by like this sort of kiddish tone to the movies. This one had a little bit harder edge, and yeah, it definitely held up a lot better. I enjoyed this rewatch a lot more than I enjoyed the first two. Although, when I first saw it, it wasn't necessary. It was unexpected. Like, I wasn't expecting it to be the way that it was, and so I was kind of like, I don't know if I loved that. And now I actually really like it a lot better than the first two.
It is a big jump from Chamber of Secrets to Prisoner of Azkaban in terms of style, isn't it?
It really is. And as a fan, as the movies are coming out, at first you're like, whoa, where did this come from? Totally different kind of movie than those first two, but I think it works really well. It has a few problems, but overall, a much more enjoyable movie.
Yeah, it holds up a lot more. Okay, why am I getting that echo? Can you hear that echo?
No, that's gone now.
Okay. I've been having all kinds of problems with Google Hangout lately, so I'm sorry if anything like that happens. Hopefully we'll be okay. Okay, Jeremy, what about you?
I really enjoyed the rewatch as well. It's a really great movie, and I didn't remember it being that great, but it was really enjoyable. Again, the flow was very good. I didn't feel like it really dragged anywhere. Again, the shift in tone, I think, in the books, the series tends to get darker the farther into the series you go, just because of the nature of what Voldemort and his crew were doing. And I think the shift between books 2 and 3 and the movies 2 and 3, I think the shift in the movies was a little greater just because the first two movies were so, as Abby put it, kiddish. And so I think it was a bit of a jump style-wise, but I think in this case it was a very good jump and got the series kind of back where it needed to be moving forward. And plus, who doesn't like a good Hermione punching Malfoy in the face?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can watch it over and over. That's like Tyrion slapping Joffrey.
All right. So Richard, if you want to share with us some of the differences from the book. I did read the book this time, but why don't you give us, I know there's more here that's different, so why don't you share some of those things?
Okay, well, it is generally faithful to the overall story, but there is a lot more that gets cut out than the previous two films, and one of them is Quidditch. We see the first Quidditch match against Hufflepuff, but then in the book there's a lot more focus on Quidditch between Ravenclaw and Slytherin. In fact, it's the only book in which Harry plays all three matches in the year, and they end up winning the Quidditch Cup. And also because you cut out the Quidditch, the middle of the story in the film, it moves a lot quicker. I mean, the beginning and the end are pretty much the same as in the book, but the middle goes by a lot quicker because there's so much Quidditch in the book. And also, instead of getting the firebolt at the end, Harry gets his firebolt at Christmas in the book, and so he's able to use it in his Quidditch matches after his first broomstick gets destroyed.
Mm.
And also think that was a bit, it might be a bit confusing for people who didn't read the book. It doesn't really explain enough about the friendship between James, Sirius, Peter, and Lupin at school. It just mentions that they were friends at school, but it never mentions that they actually drew the Marauders map. They were Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. And so I think people who hadn't read the book will be confused by that, because it doesn't explain how Lupin and Snape knew that everybody was in the Shrieking Shack, whereas in the book they just looked at the Marauders map and saw them there.
Okay.
And they don't explain why James and Sirius and Peter actually became Animagi, so they could stay with Lupin when he was a werewolf, because when Lupin was at school, he would go into the Shrieking Shack to transform into a werewolf, and that was why people thought it was haunted, because they heard him screaming and howling from inside. But there were no actual ghosts there, so none of that's in the film. And there's also a bit more tension between Ron and Hermione. They fight a lot about Crookshanks and Scabbers, and also Hermione's going through a lot of stress in the book because of the time turner. It's just completely really messing with her head a bit, having to do all these classes over and over and having this really long schedule, and it gets to her quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And also that scene where Harry goes wandering in the corridor at night because he sees Peter Pettigrew on the map, that's not really in the book, but there is the interaction that takes place between Harry and Snape and Lupin in the film. That sort of is in the book, but it's after Harry goes to Hogsmeade for the second time, and in the film we only see him doing that once. But in the book, he does it twice, and the second time, Malfoy sees him and tells Snape about it, and that's when he gets into trouble with Snape and the map, and Lupin has to cover for him.
Okay, and they make a bigger deal in the movie about they give a little more hints at the Ron Hermione kind of romance, right?
Yeah, there isn't really that much about. I mean, while there is a lot of tension between Ron and Hermione in the book, as I said, it's not really like romantic tension. But it's only like in Goblet of Fire in the book that you start getting these indications that there is going to be a romance between the two.
Mm.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons I didn't like this on first viewing is because it was so confusing to me. Like, I hadn't finished the third book yet. I think we were reading it, and I was having a hard time getting through it. And the movie does leave a lot of things unsaid. I remember feeling confused by it, like I didn't have all the information. Now that I know the story well from the book, I fill in that information myself when I watch it. I know that information. I don't need it from the movie.
Yeah. It's fine if you've read the book, but it just if you haven't, then it's not quite so friendly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel about the from this movie going forward. That's kind of how I feel about all of them. Is really you need to have read the books, and then these become a kind of a nice visual guide to what happened in the books, but it's not filling in the whole story because they have to make choices to make it a good movie.
Right. Yeah, I think there's more of an emphasis from this time forward on making I think they're maybe a little more confident that they can stray from the book a little bit on making a good movie as opposed to pleasing the fans. Maybe the fans were at that point they're like, we've got him, we've got the support. We don't need to be as sticklers to things. And okay, so one thing I thought this was really good example of kind of what this movie did for the Harry Potter franchise. I was watching over on Collider their movie news, and somebody asked, what is a series that everybody loves but you never got as into? And the guy, Dennis Zhang, he said Harry Potter, and I thought his sort of experience is very kind of emblematic of what a lot of people experience as far as Harry Potter. He says, the Harry Potter series for me was something I didn't really have any interest in. There was a lot of hype on it. I think by the time I actually started watching it, it was right before the 6th movie. I decided, all right, Harry Potter is this thing, huge thing. Everyone loves it. Let me check it out. So I started with the first one, didn't like it, thought it was boring. Watched the second one, was even more boring. So when the third one started, I was like, this is it. Everyone talks about this one. It's Alfonso Cuarón. If I don't like this one, then I'm not watching any more of these movies. Watched it, loved it. That was my favorite of the franchise, and I ended up watching the rest. And Yeah, I thought that's really emblematic of I think a lot of people's experience with the franchise. So,
I
um,
could definitely see having a hard time getting into it if you don't get into it till it's at its like full blossom of hype.
yeah, I think so. Okay, alrighty. So here we go. So we have the biggest change in this film is new director Alfonso Cuarón, and he, in my opinion, is a master filmmaker. I mean, I love Chris Columbus. Don't get me wrong, but I would say that Chris Columbus makes satisfying movies. He makes fun movies, but I wouldn't say he's a master. He's not an artist the way that Alfonso Cuarón is, and Alfonso Cuarón has made some just incredible movies like Children of Men is really, really great. And he made Gravity. I don't know since this, if you've seen Gravity. Just some great, great movies. And uh, so he uses a lot of revolutionary techniques within the film. And so, what are some things in his directing that stood out to you? What about you, Richard? Start with you.
Well, the only other Alfonso Cuarón movie I think I've seen is Gravity, and to be honest, I'd actually forgotten that he directed Gravity until you just mentioned it. But so it's hard so it's hard to really compare that with other films he's done, but you can see some of the approaches he has that recur through the film, like the camera is very dynamic. In just about nearly every shot the camera is moving around, and which gives more of a dynamism to the film. And he's also more inventive with his editing than Chris Columbus was. I mean, the scene with Aunt Marge is a perfect example where you got all these things going on, like the cuckoo clock is going off, and it's just going back and forth between the different characters, and his circus music is playing, and you can't really imagine something like that in the previous films. And I think something you've mentioned when we were talking about this is earlier about his use of like windows and reflections, didn't you?
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. One thing I was gonna say is, yeah, he frequently will have a character that's either photographed inside with a window in front of them, or with a mirror behind them, so you see kind of back to them, or some other kind of a little bit more creative a way of sort of stage the shot. What about you, Jeremy? What did you notice that Alfonso Cuarón did maybe differently?
Oh, what you've already mentioned, definitely. I think the film was more visually interesting. It really, almost all the scenes, had something that was being done to just kind of appeal to the eye, I guess. The other things, again, I think we briefly mentioned earlier, the acting overall, especially from the kids, was generally better. Um, uh, I felt Hermione and Harry both were more real than previously. Um, and we have a new Dumbledore, and so it's hard to compare those two performances because it's different. But overall, I felt like the acting was better, and again, the visualization throughout.
Yeah, he did things. He made choices that added to the realism. I thought, like when Arthur Weasley is telling Harry Potter about Sirius Black, telling him who he is, and he's being really secretive. They don't just like hide away in a hole and talk about it. They're in kind of this public place, and they don't have a place to be where they can really talk about it without being eavesdropped on, and so Arthur's moving around, constantly watching, trying to make sure that they're not being eavesdropped on, that nobody's spying on them. Like, those kinds of things weren't attended to in the previous movies. Like, just those little details that make it a little more raw and a little more realistic were ignored previously, where Alfonso Cuarón paid attention to them.
Yeah. definitely. Another thing that I noticed this time, but maybe I wouldn't have noticed before, is his use of long takes. That in the way the camera kind of moves around, and you won't get any break in sort of the motion of the shot. I was watching something where they said that it was that one of them was as long as like 3 minutes, where there's just no break in the camera work, and that was really cool too. Just kind of adds a layer to the tension and to kind of what's going on. Let's see here. Ugh, I'm having so many problems with my internet. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, so how does Cuarón and cinematographer Michael Saracen effectively capture a change in tone from the first two films? And so, what did you think of what did you think of the visual effects and production design here? Maybe in comparison to the first two films. What about you, Abby? You want to start?
I think the visual effects were greatly improved. The tone, it seems like the actual lighting of the movie was darker in general, and then they also used music a lot differently than had been done in the previous movies. Some of that I actually felt was a little bit distracting. But, sorry. But, yeah, the visual effects were pretty good. I liked the night bus. I liked, what's his name? Buckbeak. He looked awesome. I didn't feel like the Aunt Marge thing at the beginning looked all that great. And I didn't love... It was well done, but I didn't like the way that Lupin was animated when he turned into a werewolf, when he transformed. I thought that was really strange looking. I didn't think it fit any picture of what I would think a werewolf looks like. And it didn't look particularly like Lupin to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was well rendered, but it wasn't really what I expected to see. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And
I could see.
You talked about with what Alfonso Cuarón did with like the long takes and the lots of camera movement. I think all of that really added to the change in tone also.
Yeah. It just adds this sort of suspense to it, like you're held in the moment, I think, a little bit more when you have a long take like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about you, Jeremy? Do you know anything about production design or visual effects or cinematography?
I'll echo Abby's statements especially with the CG effects. There were parts of the thing with Marge that I thought were okay, but then overall, it just didn't look that great anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Buckbeak again was very well done. I think you take away the human element, and it's easier to make something look more real, as odd as that sounds. And again, the Lupin, I wasn't that impressed. I didn't feel like that animation held up. It just didn't look as real, didn't look frightening to me. So that's kind of where I am with that. This is more of a style choice than anything, but I was disappointed in the Expecto Patronum spell and how they rendered it. I was glad that they at one point did have Harry's stag appear, but that is meant to be what the spell looks like anytime it happens. Is if it's the full version of the spell, the Patronus comes out and the Patronus actually fights off the Dementors instead of these waves of white light, which maybe it probably looks better on the screen, and so I can get the style choice. But I still would prefer seeing something more true to, like when he's doing the practices and things, that you actually get to seeing that Patronus emerge like it should.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I can see what you're saying.
Hmm.
What about you, Richard? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, with regards to the making the tone, I think Abby's mentioned the overall coloration of the film, and that plays an important part. It's a bit it's much less bright than the other two films. I mean, I was actually watching this program the other night, just happened to have a clip from Philosopher's Stone, and I was struck by just how bright it was compared to Prisoner of Azkaban. And I think, and that's kind of ties to what I said about it being more realistic. It kind of feels more like what you see when you look at the world with your own eyes.
Mm.
There's also good use of the environment, like when you see the whole What's Express is going through this fog that feels very dark, and after Harry's left his aunt and uncle's house, and there's this kind of ominous empty playground with these kind of echoing sounds when the seesaw falls and that. And with regards to the CGI, that's pretty good. I mean, I wasn't entirely satisfied with the werewolf either. I mean, the idea with that is that Rowling actually intended lycanthropy to be this metaphor for diseases like AIDS, and so the
Oh.
werewolf was intended to look like it was sick, just this kind of wasted creature. And so I get what they were going for that, but it didn't look scary, and so it didn't really work for me. But the Dementors I thought were very good, and I especially liked how they make ice everywhere they go. So you don't have people saying that if they make you feel cold, and also how you can kind of visually sucking them, draining the emotions and the happiness out of people as well. So the Dementors I thought were done very well.
I didn't notice. I didn't know that about the AIDS thing. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, the Dementors I'm actually really impressed with. Like,
Yeah.
'cause the scary thing about the Dementors is the way they make you feel.
Yeah.
And we can
Dementors-
hear how
yeah.
they make the characters feel in the book. We get to read their minds. But in the movie, it's really hard to visually represent that, and he did a good job with that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think you almost feel the cold, like you were saying. They're really, really pretty scary, and they could be cheesy. I think very easily.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Looking a bit like Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
But,
that's a good comparison.
Yeah, but Rawlings actually said that Dementors are actually meant to represent depression, because she has suffered from depression in the past. If the feeling that you'll never be happy again, you're just thinking about all the worst times in your life. That's how Dementors are supposed to make people feel.
Huh. I
Yeah.
never thought of that either. We do have one comment from my internet is being so slow, so I'm sorry if I missed comments, but we did have one. It's her name is Potterhead, and she says, as a child, Chamber of Secrets was always my favorite of the first three films. I liked Prisoner of Azkaban, but it wasn't my favorite. But as I've grown up, Prisoner of Azkaban has really grown on me. I actually prefer Prisoner of Azkaban to Chamber of Secrets and Philosopher's Stone, but I still love these first two films. So there you go. Yeah, I think that even in the design of Hogwarts, as far as production design, I think that it looks more sort of gothic. It looks sort of more, kind of. It almost has a little bit more of sort of like a Notre Dame kind of look to it. And so I think all of those little details really just like take out the whimsy and put on sort of a more sort of scary kind of feel to the whole thing. So
There is more landscape, isn't there, than there was in the other two films. There's more, like especially in the scene with flying on Buckbeak, you can see more of the landscape around the castle.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a real sense of just sort of. It almost reminds me of like Sleeping Beauty, with all the thorns and all the. It's just more sort of earthy feeling than the previous one. Okay, so next I have Harry storms off at the beginning after injuring Aunt Marge. How do you feel about this show of independence from Harry, and what do you think? So why don't you, Richard? Why don't you start?
Yeah. Well, basically, just it kind of shows how he's entering his moody teenage years now. I mean, you can see that right from the beginning of the film. He's acting quite differently from how he is in previous films, where he's a bit cocky with Aunt Marge when she's asking about whether they used a cane at his school, and he's smirking and saying, "Oh yeah, I've been caned loads of times." And then when he's yelling at her after she insults his parents, and he goes upstairs afterwards and kicks his cabinet. And he's basically just reached breaking points, and he's not really thinking it through. He's just thinking, "That's it. I've had enough. I'm getting out of here."
Mhm.
So he's just being a teenager, really.
Yeah. Uh, what What about you, Abby? What do you think about Harry in those early scenes?
I agree. I mean, it's really developmentally appropriate for the character. It is a big shift for him, like, sort of attitudinally, but it does make sense with the point he's at in his development. I mean, he's just turned 13 this summer, and yeah, I've taught students close to that age, and that's where they hit it. They're right about 13. Parents are like, "What happened to my child? That this is a completely different person." And yeah, so that's about where it is.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like he's now tasted independence now for 2 years. He's tasted love. He's tasted all of these things. So it kind of makes sense that he just couldn't take it anymore. You know, it's like it's one thing to kind of deal with all of that stuff when you don't have any other options, but now that he has, it makes sense to me that he'd be like, screw this, you know, I'm done.
Exactly.
Well, I
So.
think you see him growing and developing each year, and the things that he's overcoming. I mean, in the end of the second book and movie, he defeats a basilisk. You know, and it's so you have this progression, this growth of his character, and you look in the first book and film, and he's just kind of a pushover to the Dursleys. Whatever they say, he does it because he's supposed to, and he just kind of gets pushed around it. And now I think he's starting to realize, you know, on some level, I defeated a basilisk last year, and that was terrifying and frightening, but I did that. I'm not going to take this from Uncle Vernon anymore. I'm not going to take this from Aunt Marge. I don't have to just live this way, you know. So I think it's a natural progression of his growth and the strength that he's going to need as he goes forward in the next few years.
Yeah, in the book as well, this is the point where he starts talking back to the Dursleys a lot more.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point that he now knows how strong he is, whereas before he wouldn't have had any reason to know that.
He's also savvy
That's a
enough
good
now
point.
to kind of see that they're a little bit afraid of him.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
they have good reason to be.
And I think too that this whole experience. So you have Harry basically run away for a brief amount of time, and then the wizarding community, those that know about him, are freaking out because Sirius Black is out there. And so I think this really highlights something that will come out later in definitely in the books, possibly in the movies, where Dumbledore feels like he has shielded Harry too much from what's going on and what the real dangers are. And in this is just a great case of them not being aware of, you know, he's a teenager, he's likely to get upset and run off on his own at some point, but they didn't tell him, by the way, there's this, you know, who's believed to be a mass murderer out there, and he's probably coming for you, so don't run away right now. You know, I think it just kind of shows how much, again, they're kind of ignoring his progress and his growth, those who are protecting him.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And also, like, I think he realizes a little bit of, wow, the rules aren't that important in a way, because like nobody's mad at him for what he does. You know, like in a way, it sort of almost encourages him.
Yeah. Well, he is kind of expecting to be punished because, I mean, in Chamber of Secrets, you don't see it in the film, but in the book, he gets a warning when Dobby uses the spell to make the pudding float. The Ministry thinks that was Harry, and so he gets his official warning saying you're not allowed to use magic outside school. And so that's when, after he blows up Aunt Marge, he's expecting the Minister to punish him.
Yeah, in the movie, I had a problem with the fact that they open with him practicing the Lumos spell in bed.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's no mention of that at all. It's like, oh, well, you blew up your aunt, but don't, oh, and also quit practicing magic in your bed, you know?
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
movie, the whole like no practicing magic outside school rule is a lot less of a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, Hermione does it in Chamber of Secrets, doesn't she, in Diagon Alley when she fixes Harry's glasses.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And he uses it in his room there somehow too, I think. I think he uses it to pack up his things
Yeah.
or something.
Okay. We do have another comment from Potterhead. She says, Alfonso Cuarón did brilliantly with this film, I think. There you go. I agree. You did a very good job. Okay, so I think that is all really good. The night bus, I thought, is a lot of fun. Like, I think you kind of need that in this. You need something new. You need something different that we haven't seen before. But also, it's I don't know. It just lights the mood a little bit. You kind of had. I mean, the Marge scene I think is kind of funny. I don't. It's silly. You know, sort of a Willy Wonka kind of moment.
Oh yeah, very
You
well
know.
dull. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have the night bus, which is just kind of a little bit of fun added in there.
My only qualm was I actually felt like the music they used during the night bus was distracting to me. It was some kind of jazz or he uses a lot of like jazz and big band music, and I think part of it is because that's sort of suits his camera work in some of those scenes. But I didn't like it. I felt like it didn't quite fit the tone of the scene, and it didn't quite. I don't know. I was focused on it, so that's a problem. You know.
I'm just looking here. Who did the music on this one?
I think it was John Williams again.
Is it?
I think so.
Okay. I had forgotten to write that down. Yeah, I mean, that is one. I mean, John Williams, obviously a master at what he does, but I do think sometimes he can be a little overbearing, and he'll tell you how you're supposed to feel as opposed to letting the scene be just sort of more quiet. And that's one thing. I mean, not talk about Gravity, but I think maybe Alfonso Cuarón learned a little bit because in Gravity there's almost no music and it's so tense. So I think that that is true. Let me see here. John Williams. Yeah, you're right. John Williams. That's a good point.
I didn't notice the music, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it should just kind of be there.
Right.
It should seem like it would be weird without it, but this one it seemed like it was weird with it. At least in certain scenes. This scene, and then the other scene where they used jazz was with Lupin teaching them how to do the...
the boggart.
Yeah.
He actually puts a record player on, doesn't he? It's his own music. Yeah.
That was kind of an odd...
Strange thing to do, yeah.
Yeah.
Though I did enjoy the boggart montage. That was a really enjoyable scene, yeah, I really liked that one. Although I agree the music was still an odd choice, but I liked the montage treatment for that class.
Yeah. Yeah, I will talk a little bit more about that scene in a little bit, but yeah, there's enough sort of interruptions in the darkness and in the to keep it at least marginally kid friendly, I feel like, and just to kind of keep it keep the tone, moderate the tone, I think well. Mm-hmm. We have another comment from Potter. She says, I think the CGI and SFX improved a lot in this film from the previous two films, while some of the SFX and CGI didn't hold up in the first two films. I think all of the special effects and CGI holds up in this film. Dementors look great, Buckbeak looks great, the Night Bus looks great, etc. So, yeah, I'd agree. I think they all hold up pretty well. I mean, if I was going to nitpick when Buckbeak and Harry are flying, that still looks a little cheesy, but not a big deal. Not a big deal. Okay, so next I have, does the film effectively create mystery surrounding Sirius Black, and how does Gary Oldman do as Sirius? So what about you, Jeremy? What do you think?
Does it create mystery around him? I think it does. And again, I really appreciated the book more in this respect, where it fills in more of that backstory with James and Peter and Remus. I really did miss that watching the movie, because again, it gives you more of that depth. It's not just, oh, he was a friend of your parents and betrayed them, but he was in fact your father's very best friend. And here's, some examples of the exploits, like, and it's too much to put in a movie, but still it'd be nice to have some a little more touch on that. But I felt like they did a good job of kind of creating the suspense with Sirius. And again, when Harry strikes out on his own and finally lands in Diagon Alley, and he catches up at the Leaky Cauldron with the Weasleys, and Arthur kind of fills him in on what's going on. I think you get the idea. Okay, there really is something serious going on. Pardon the pun. But you get that idea. Yeah, it is a big deal. What was the second part of the question?
How does Gary Oldman do in the part?
I think he does really well. I really like him for the part, and even beyond this movie as well. But I really liked him in it, and felt like it was believable. It is tough. Like, it's an interesting character to play, because you have this guy who, in the flashbacks, we can see is just a really fun-loving, kind of rule breaker. But now he has spent 12 years in Azkaban. Where the Dementors are constantly draining you of any happy thoughts, and so for a person who enjoyed life as much as Sirius did, to be deprived of those feelings for 12 years, what does that do to you? And I think that's kind of created the twisted character that Sirius, or that Gary Oldman portrayed here, and I think he did a great job with it.
Yeah, I mean, because this is the first time that you really see any real anger out of Harry, I feel like, and when he has you really feel like he's gonna kill Sirius. I feel like he's so angry at what he believes Sirius did to his parents, and I think that they do a good job. I wouldn't have. If I had no idea, I don't think I would necessarily have caught on that, oh, he's really a good guy in disguise. I think they do a pretty good job with that.
No, I think Dumbledore does say in the book that Sirius has not acted like an innocent man, and he basically, with regards to the question, I feel it does get the basic details of Black's story right. It includes those, and there is one bit it leaves out where Black actually breaks into Gryffindor Tower a second time. The first time is when he tries to get past a fat lady and slashes her portrait. But then there's another time later where he actually gets into the tower and gets up to Ron's bed and trying to get Scabbers. And so that adds a bit more mystery and tension, because you're wondering just how Black is getting into the castle. But basically the film does a good job providing that mystery, and also getting the pieces put together of just how Sirius relates to Harry and his background with Harry's parents. And Gary Oldman is a brilliant actor, and I feel he does a very good job here. When we first see Sirius, he's quite manic about wanting to kill Peter, and as Jeremy said, he's quite broken from all his time spent in Azkaban for something he didn't even do. Just the way when he yells like, "I did my waiting 12 years of it in Azkaban," he just sounds like this really broken man. But then he also has this other side to him, this very caring godfather who truly loves Harry, his best friend's son. And he has these two like quite heartfelt conversations with Harry that are quite nice. So yeah, I think Gary Oldman does a very good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. So, okay, my next question is: Hagrid has become a professor, and a new teacher is added named Professor Lupin. What are your feelings about both in this film? Start with you, Abby. What do you think?
I actually really like Hagrid being the Care of Magical Creatures professor. I think he's the right guy for that job. Like, he should have had that position all along. And I really like Lupin. Bringing Lupin in here is kind of interesting, because we're starting. This is a cool movie and story generally, because we're starting to meet all the people that Harry's parents hung out with. And, like, how significant is that to him? You know, any person who knew his parents, that's got to be really significant to this kid to be able to interact with them. I think it's too bad that Lupin can't stay on as the Defense Against the Dark Arts guy after this year, because he's good at it, and he's a good guy.
Yeah.
And, you know, Dumbledore trusts him and all of that. So it kind of takes away some of the problems that come with that job.
Is it just because he's a werewolf and like that's not allowed to be a werewolf and be a teacher?
I don't know. I think Dumbledore knew he was a werewolf going in because he had Snape making his potion, right?
Yeah, the staff knew, but it wasn't generally known. And then Snape gives it away at the end, and Lupin thinks that all the parents of students are not going to want a werewolf at the school because werewolves are really looked down upon. So he decides to leave then. And also he doesn't want to risk putting these students in danger again.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what I was going to say. People will probably be upset that even though, as we've mentioned many times, there's quite a lot of peril.
Never mind the Whomping Willow that's
Yeah.
still there. Why aren't parents demanding that be removed from the grounds?
Giant spider in the woods and all of that.
But no, we can't have a werewolf. We can't go
Yeah.
to Hogsmeade without a permission slip, and we can't have a werewolf on the property.
Well, that's another. I actually don't have a question about this, but that's another thing I think that that it's the first time that you really feel Harry's loneliness. I think because he doesn't get to go with his friends, you know, a lot. Like you really, especially in the book, but not maybe not as much here, but you definitely do feel that in the end it will come down to him. Like he. As opposed to in the first two where, you know, it's like Hermione does her part and where in this case, I don't know, you just feel his sort of loneliness as a character, I think the most.
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see that as a teenager, he's struggling with his differentness. When you're 11 years old, you're not as attentive, but when you hit that, like, once you start to hit puberty, then suddenly you're just hyper aware of anything about you that makes you stand out or makes you a little bit different from other kids. And I think he's hitting that point in this movie, and that's highlighted by his having to stay back in Hogsmeade. He's the weird one. He's the different one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Ron and Hermione have always been there for him in the previous films, haven't they? Except when Hermione was petrified for a little while, and then they got to Hogsmeade. He doesn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And also you've got both Lupin kind of highlighting the connection with his parents, and also the Dementors where he's forced to hear his mother screaming whenever they get near him, and that's just reminding him of what he doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, did anyone else have thoughts on Hagrid and Lupin before we move on?
I think Hagrid is one of those teachers where you know his heart's in the right place, but he's still not the greatest teacher in the world. I mean, it might have not been the best idea to use a hippogriff, this creature that can and does injure his students in his first class. And also then he just wanders off with Malfoy and just leaves Buckbeak untethered with all the others. I mean, what are they supposed to do then? Yeah. Whereas,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. Whereas Lupin, he's basically everything a teacher should be. He's very supportive and he knows how to inspire the students, like what he does with Neville and the Boggart. But he also exerts discipline when he needs to, like when he tells Harry off wandering about in the corridors at night. He is basically the perfect teacher, apart from the fact that he's a werewolf.
That's true. I think Hagrid, I actually really think Hagrid's an awesome teacher with like the whole wanting to do really hands-on stuff, and Malfoy's just a little jerk who ruins the good classes for everybody.
Well, yeah, it is Malfoy's fault ultimately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it kind of shows Hagrid though. I mean, he really has no filter for what's dangerous and what's not. Like he bring in the baby dragon, and You know, just all these different things that he does throughout the years, and so he just really doesn't have this understanding. And but even the textbook he chose, the Monster Book of Monsters, that will attack you unless you strike the spine or stroke the spine, but there's no instruction. Hey, by the way, when you order this book, stroke the spine so that it'll calm down and you can read it.
Yeah, I mean, why don't they stroke the spines when they put them on the shelves? I mean, in the book, they've got this big cage in the bookshop where all the books are just fighting each other.
Yeah, and but so the book, choosing that book and then you know, have introducing to the hippogriff, I think he's just like, this is really cool and I want you to see it, and I really like the enthusiasm, but again, just not having that filter for what's dangerous, that's a tough thing to overcome.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, in a way, I had a philosophy teacher in college who he would have these extremely complex arguments, these philosophical arguments, and he would just assume that everyone understood it instead of, and I was always the sort of the one who was willing to ask the question that everyone else was wanting to know, and I just remember so many times him looking at me and being like, "Oh, you don't understand." like it had never occurred to him that this might not make sense, you know. And I kind of feel that way with Hagrid, that like it doesn't even occur to him that this could be a problem at all. Anyway, it's funny.
Yeah, he's sort of naive. He's also a little more gullible. He's too gullible a personality for teenagers. He probably should be teaching someone other than teenage children who are going to totally take advantage of him.
Probably.
I will say too, in his defense, you know, you do have this scene with the hippogriff with Buckbeak, and you know, he's teaching the kids how to be safe around a hippogriff and how to actually approach it, and so he is trying to teach the way to be safe in this circumstance, but he again is naive enough to think that you know, there doesn't need to be a boundary here, that, you know, and understanding that some kids are not going to, you know, some kids are going to be Malfoy and they're not going to follow the rules that you set, and so you need to have some other protections in place to keep them safe when you know there's going to be somebody in the crowd like that.
Yeah, worst case, you should assume worst case scenario. I think when you're working with teens sometimes.
Yeah. And it doesn't occur to him to like teach this lesson in advance before they go to the hippogriff.
But again, like you said, he's hands-on. He doesn't think about, you know, doing a lecture hall and then going to see the hippogriff. It's here it is. This is the creature, and here's how you deal with it.
Well, that's how he learned about magical creatures.
So did you buy that they would really execute Buckbeak because of what he did to Malfoy?
Yes. Absolutely, because of his father.
Yeah.
He's a rich and powerful wizard. Even if he's not respected, he's feared because he was so close to Voldemort. I absolutely believe he'd have been executed, being Buckbeak, being executed for injuring Malfoy's son.
And Malfoy's also supposed to be close to the Minister of Magic, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a very influential man. He basically slipped a lot of money into the right pockets.
Yeah. We did get another comment. She says, John Williams did brilliantly with the score once again, I think. It was different from the previous two films, but appropriately so, as the tone and direction did shift with this film. Yes, Williams' music is quite noticeable and maybe even overbearing at times, but all of his work is great, and it also makes it good for listening to the score later on. John Williams often does quite noticeable and loud scores for films he works on. He did it on the other Harry Potter films, and he does it in this film. He also did it in Star Wars, but I think it's great. I have actually purchased all of the Harry Potter soundtracks on iTunes. So, there you go. Okay, so next question is, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but can you sense any difference in the acting with all of the leads, particularly the kids? And I have a quote from Daniel Radcliffe I just wanted to read that I thought was really cool. He says, I think he did wonders for us, talking about Cuarón. That was the film where I was suddenly of an age for the first time where I was able to be directed by him more than I had been capable of being in the past. And also, I was suddenly working with Gary Oldman and David Thewlis, and whereas all the older actors in the first two movies had known me as a kid, they hadn't. They only knew me as a 14-year-old. So they treated me as a young man rather than a boy. And I think that whole film is a huge turning point. It's really where I decided that I wanted to be and absolutely continue to be an actor. So that's really kind of interesting. What about you, Richard? What do you think as far as the acting and what Daniel Radcliffe said here?
Yeah. Well, Daniel Radcliffe, I think there is a very big difference between his acting in the first two films and this one. He seems a lot better. He's basically expressing himself in a bit more. It felt quite flat for a lot of time in the other two films, maybe a bit too polite. But now he's able to let out this kind of this more moody side and express more personality and get angry and things like that and be a little bit cocky and sarcastic, like on a train when Ron is saying about how what a terrifying killer Black is, and Harry's just like, thanks, Ron. You can't imagine Harry in the other films acting that way. And Rupert Grint and Emma Watson, I think they both do fine in this film. It's not quite as noticeable because I felt they were okay in the other films, but they all do fine. I didn't really find anything to complain about with the younger actors, and the adult actors. They're just as good as ever. Maybe some like Alan Rickman get a bit more screen time, are able to show a little bit more range. And I was quite happy with Michael Gambon taking over as Dumbledore because he brings a bit more energy to the part. I mean, I'll talk about it with the next one. I wasn't quite as happy with him in Goblet of Fire, but he was fine in this one.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, too, what he says about being treated like a man as opposed to being treated, or a young adult as opposed to being treated like a child. And that makes such a difference with kids that age. I think if you treat them, if you talk to them, if you treat them like they're not a child, they just respond. At least I certainly did, for sure, when I was that age. I don't know. What do you think, Abby?
I agree. I think there really was a definite improvement. I actually see improvement across all three of them. There were one or two moments with Hermione where she kind of felt like she had fallen back into her old acting habits from the previous movies, where her lines are a little bit, I don't know, maybe over-delivered. There were just one or two small moments where I felt that way. But I think Dan Radcliffe obviously was the standout with a marked improvement.
Yeah.
But I felt like Hermione and Ron really improved too. Like, Ron was still kind of a laughable weenie at times, but not in a way that was like too over-the-top ridiculous.
It's not as bad as Chamber of Secrets.
Yeah, in Chamber of Secrets, he kind of is really silly in the fact that he's a big weenie.
Weenie is the right word.
In this one, he's a little more subtle about it. He's honing that sort of piece of his character to be more believable. And then Hermione is a lot less she's kind of obnoxious in the other movies, and she's supposed to be, but she kind of overdoes it. And I felt like Emma Watson toned it down just enough so that it was a little more real.
Yeah, I think so too. So we have another comment. It says, the opening scene in this film is quite illogical to the mythology in the series. Students are not allowed to use magic outside of Hogwarts while under the age of 17, but the films often do this. Us fans have grown to accept it after all these years. But isn't that true in the book? Doesn't he uses magic? I mean, he does the same thing in the book, right? Outside of Hogwarts?
No, not really.
Oh, okay. I guess I forgot that.
Yes. I was going to say, by the way, since we're on this question about how the actors were treated, I don't know if you've heard this little story that when Alfonso Cuarón signed on, he hadn't actually read the book, so he asked Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint to each write an essay for him on each of their characters. And Emma Watson submitted something like an 8-page essay, Dan a 1-page essay, and then Rupert didn't submit anything because that's what Ron would have done.
That's a great story.
I hadn't heard that before. That's good. That's very
Yeah.
good.
They did say as well, from what you were saying, he did actually encourage them to bring their own approaches and add their own ideas to their acting approach.
Yeah.
Which correlates to what you were
Which
saying.
makes such a huge difference. I was just reading a quote about I'm trying to remember which. Oh, it was about Armageddon. Ben Affleck had asked Michael Bay why wouldn't they train astronauts to be drillers instead of drillers to be astronauts, and Michael Bay just said, "Shut up and make the movie. Like, we're not going to talk about it at all."
That's not cool enough.
And so, I mean, it just I think it makes between a hack filmmaker like Michael Bay and somebody who actually is an artist and cares about these actors, like Alfonso Cuarón. Okay, so my next question is: Lupin gets all of the kids to face their fears. What would be your fear in the Boggarts, and what does Harry's fear forecast for later in the story? So, what about you, Jeremy? You want to start?
No.
Okay.
I gotta think about that first part of the question.
Okay. I'll go first then. I don't know. For me, I guess the fear is I would probably I don't know. What is I'm the most fearful of? I hate any kind of contention, but like I don't know. What would I face? I mean, I don't like big dogs. That would be my thing. That would definitely be my thing in the virus. It would be a big mean dog. That would be it for me. So as far as Harry facing his fears, and this is different than in the book, right?
Hey,
Richard?
how do you mean?
Doesn't he in the I'm trying to remember, but in the book, doesn't Lupin stop before Harry, as opposed to doesn't Harry in this one actually see the Dementor in the movie?
In the book, Lupin stops him before the Boggart can do anything because he thought the Boggart would take on the form of Voldemort and that would make everybody.
Yeah.
And then later he uses the Boggart in his Patronus classes because the Boggart turns into a Dementor with Harry. Right.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I don't know. I think it works, I guess, between Harry's fears being so much scarier than everybody else's. So like he's on a different level. He's complete than all the other kids, and so that makes it clear.
Lupin does say to him, but it's just what you fear most is fear itself, because he's afraid of the effect that the Dementors actually have on him.
Yeah.
Rather than like the Dementor itself per se, the way of Ron is afraid of spiders.
Right.
Yeah. And in fact, in the book, Hermione's fear is failure. You see her encountering a Boggart in the book, and it turns into Professor McGonagall and tells her that she's failed all her subjects. And I kind of thought, that maybe that kind of shows that adults, because Hermione is probably the most mature of the three, that the more mature you are, the more abstract your fears tend to be.
Makes sense. Do you have anything like that, like spiders or snakes or anything that you would end up seeing, or heights or something like that?
I don't like moths, but I don't think that's my worst fear. Probably something more like Hermione. Certainly when I was Hermione's age, a teacher telling me I'd failed something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Either you want to, Abby or Jeremy, you want to share your what you would see, or what you think?
Well, I'll share mine now, but I'm going to need you guys to see how the ridiculous spell would counter it. First, I absolutely could have snakes or spiders or something come out of there. I'm not a fan of any of that. But the worst fear, I think, for me would be losing my family. So if I if it was, my wife and daughter dead would probably be what I would see come out of that. And so if that were the case, what do you think the ridiculous spell would do if what you see is your family dead?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way. I don't know. I don't know how you make that one funny.
Yeah, because that's actually what Mrs. Weasley sees when she sees a boggart in Order of the Phoenix. She sees all family dead.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, mine is the same as Jeremy. Like, legitimately, that's what it would be. As my kid self, probably would have been like spiders.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys went darker on that question than I was thinking. I was just like, oh, they're going to say like spiders or something like that. Okay. Okay.
I will say on that scene, though, the one thing that kind of bothered me was when Lupin stands in front of Harry and it becomes the moon. They made it very blatantly the moon in the movie because they had the clouds around it, and so everybody knew it was the full moon. But in the book, it was just this glowing sphere, and nobody really knew what it meant. Kids were kind of talking about, what was that? It was just a glowing orb, and eventually Hermione puts it together later with the werewolf lesson and everything else she's seen, but it's not evident right away.
Yeah, well, I think in a visual medium, it's going to be a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I think it works okay in the film to have it blatantly be the moon, because you're still wondering why is he afraid of the moon.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Another comment we got, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I wish that Peeves the Poltergeist had made it into these films. Rick Mayall, R.I.P., would have done a fantastic job. I hope Warner Brothers releases the deleted scenes. So, there you go. I forgot about that. That character, I guess, is in the book.
I don't think there's even been a DVD of deleted scenes where Peeves is in it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so my next question is divinations with Emma Thompson as Professor Trelawney forecast Harry's death. Is this a little heavy-handed to you? Or do you think it's kind of fun? What do you think, Abby?
I think it's a little heavy-handed, but in the story it was heavy-handed. Like, that's true to what J.K. Rowling wrote. So I'm okay with it being a little over the top. The kids kind of know her as the crazy lady, and But then we finally see that she's not just a kooky old fraud.
Yeah, I think they're trying to I think J.K. Rowling was probably trying to create tension that he's gonna die, what's gonna happen, kind of a thing. But it might be a little on the nose.
Yeah. Well, in the book, right after the class, don't they go to Transfiguration and they start talking about this, and McGonagall says to them, she does this every year. She tells a student that they're going to die, and none of them have actually died yet. Just a little bit in the book.
Yeah. Harry has a little more reason to be concerned.
Well, yeah.
Average kid.
There's an evil wizard out there who wants to kill him.
Yeah.
Not all students have that.
It's quite the teacher if she's predicting a student's death every year.
Yeah, you kind of get the impression she is quite morbid.
Yeah. I love Emma Thompson
playing this role of the diviner. She really is kind of a fraud.
Waving her hands off.
He plays it up,
Yeah. It is kind of even weird that they even have that class at Hogwarts in a way. That everything else is pretty concrete as far as, but that isn't so. Okay. So next, Hermione punches Draco in the face. Is this an empowering moment or a bad example for kids to use violence to solve problems?
I like it.
Yeah.
Draco's a little jerk, and if my daughter punched a kid like Draco, I'd be like, "Good for you."
See, that's interesting. I was going to ask you, did you have a daughter? How you felt about that?
I'd be totally okay with it.
I think. So I'll say she would most likely get in trouble over punching him in the face at school. Except I don't think Draco's going to go tell anybody that he got punched in the face by a girl, specifically a mudblood, in his words. Um, so
That's a good
I
point.
really enjoyed the scene, and I felt like she showed great restraint because she had her wand to his neck, and she could have. I'm sure she had any number of incantations she wanted to use, and just chose to punch him instead, which would leave a kind of a more lasting mark in a different way. So I really liked it. I actually felt like the more risky behavior that was shown to kids was the de-pantsing, and I can't remember which character it was, but it was when Malfoy and his two cronies were out near Hogsmeade, and Harry's throwing snowballs at him, and he pulls the pants off of one of them. And we think it's all good fun, but if you do that one in school nowadays, you're going to be in a whole load of trouble.
Yeah, well, real children don't have an invisibility cloak to do that, do they?
Right.
Right. Well, of course, Jeremy is the school administrator, so
Yeah.
he knows the ins and outs of, okay, this is actually a really huge discipline problem if somebody pulls someone else's pants down. That's sexual harassment.
Right.
You'd be in a lot of trouble for both of those.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, it's a really fun moment. I guess I could see some people's point, but like I think that kids can handle. Kids know. I don't think anyone's going to be like I don't think any kid's going to be like, I'm going to go punch somebody in the face because Hermione did.
No. It is kind of a... It could see it as a form. Sorry, you
Oh,
go
go
on.
ahead.
Sorry.
I think it's way worse when they're casting all kinds of horrible spells at each other. I mean, there are worse things than punching someone in the face.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say maybe some kids would see it as maybe a little bit of escapism. Like maybe that's what they'd like to do to a kid like Malfoy, but they know they can't. So they
Yeah,
just watch Hermione doing it instead.
And that's where the de-pantsing to me is a little worse because of all the things that happen in the film. That's the one I think my 7-year-old daughter would take away and say, "Oh, I could pull down somebody's pants and it would be funny." You know, that's the one that I really think kids might run away and try.
Yeah, that's true.
Damn, I got a cough all of a sudden. That's a good point. I wouldn't have thought of that. Okay, so next I have Peter Pettigrew ends up being Ron's rat Scabbers. Is this effective or silly? It's kind of silly. I mean, he's got quite the dedication. 12 years as a rat. Holy cow. And it looks so silly when he gets changed out of being a rat. And you got, like, the poor actor. I feel bad for him. But I don't know. What do you think about the Scabbers twist? What about you, Richard?
Hey, I actually like it. I actually thought it was one of the better twists in the books. I remember reading it for the first time, and when he gets to the bit in the book where they're just saying he's not a rat, he's a man, and his name is Peter Pettigrew, I was like, what? So I thought it was a real shock, and I could buy it really. It kind of tied into what thing they'd already established, like how Scabbers was missing a toe and how he was getting all stressed because of Sirius being free, and so I am okay with it in both the book and the film. But you're right. It's a bit Timothy. I think it's Timothy Spall who plays him. And he does look a bit silly with his rat-like appearance. So maybe that could be a bit better.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's actually a pretty good twist and a pretty plausible one in this particular world.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little bit silly, but that's okay. There can be some silliness.
Yeah.
I agree with you, though. I don't like the look of him when he gets changed back to a human. I think he's too rat-like. Like, it just doesn't make sense that he would look just like a rat. I mean,
yeah.
Sirius doesn't look just like a dog, you know?
It's like if you I don't know. I mean, I just try to imagine what the casting director must have thought. I've got to find a man who looks like a rat. Like, poor actor.
Well, I think it was Abby pointed out yesterday when we were watching, you know, we don't know the effects of holding your animal form for 12 years, and maybe it really did end up altering the human form to some extent. I don't know that any other animagus that we know of has maintained their form for that long.
No, none of them
Right.
are ever mentioned. There's hardly ever any anime guy in the world.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, if I'm remembering it, maybe Richard, you can help from the book. Sirius actually made the plan to escape Azkaban after seeing the clipping of Ron's family in the newspaper because he
That's
recognized
right.
Scabbers as Peter, and that's why he decided he changed into his dog form and was able to escape. But
Yeah.
he didn't choose to until he saw Peter in the photo.
Yeah, that's right, because he realized that Peter was at Hogwarts where Harry was, and therefore, if Peter ever got word that Voldemort was getting stronger, he could immediately act and possibly kidnap Harry.
Ew, I never noticed that or made that connection.
It was only in the book.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Okay. Okay, so next I have, what do you feel about the Patronus scene? Both of them, really. There's two Patronus scenes. I feel like it's such a peaceful moment. It's such a quiet moment that I really appreciate those moments in the series that feel sort of peaceful. And I feel like that's almost what you always feel when you bring in anything with Harry and his parents and his sort of grief and his thoughts about his parents, and there's always just sort of this peacefulness that I think that the films and the books are able to sort of bring in. Anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Which Patronus scene do you mean? The one where he's learning to do it, or the one where he actually casts it for the first time?
When he casts it for the first time, and then he sees himself, and he thinks it's his dad.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have preferred to see more of the stag, to be honest. I mean, you can't see how it's shaped. You can't see it briefly being shaped like a stag, but I would have preferred to see it kind of running down the Dementors. It would have looked a bit better, I think. But then you don't get the explanation of why it's a stag in the first place, because Harry's dad's animagus form was a stag.
Right.
But I think it's okay. There's nothing especially wrong with it. It is a nice moment.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's weird that in the movie it seems weird that he thinks it's his dad. In the book it seems like there's more explanation of why he thinks it's his dad. But
Well,
I do kind of...
You don't really see the other Harry at that moment, do you? You just see the Patronus.
You really don't. You just see the Patronus, and you're like, well, where is he getting that this is his dad? Like...
Now in the book, it seems like he experienced. Did he get to go back into someone's memories in the book and see his dad and their cohorts together, or was that only in a later book?
I think that was in Order of the Phoenix where he actually sees this. I mean, in this book, he's hearing the Dementor. He's hearing their voices when the Dementors get close to him, and he's got his photo album of his parents' faces anyway.
He's got the photo album because I think that's in the book. It just kind of mentions, he sees somebody who looks similar to him with glasses and assumes it must be his dad. Because your natural reaction isn't going to be, oh, it's me. You won't go there.
Does J.K. Rowling ever explain why certain people become ghosts and certain people you don't become ghosts?
Basically, you become a ghost if you're afraid of death, or you've got a really big reason to stay on Earth. But only wizards can do it, not Muggles, and very few wizards choose to do it. Just if you feel you'd rather stay on Earth in this kind of half-life, where you can still be around and able to think and move, but you can't really do anything like eat or drink. And so it's not a choice that most people go for.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
I did like this scene too because it's kind of the first moment where you see Harry's true power as a wizard. In the first two films, he uses more practical, physical ways to fight off the villain at the end, whether it's the basilisk or Quirrell back in the first film. And this one, you really see, you get the remark from Hermione that only a great wizard could have conjured that Patronus spell. Again, so I think you're kind of getting this idea that Harry really does have a great power within him, and the fact that as a third year he can create a full Patronus is still impressive when he takes the ordinary wizarding levels in the fifth year. They just say, oh, you can do a full Patronus. That's amazing for someone of your age. But here he's doing it 2 years previously. So it's a really great tribute to the power he has.
Yeah. Okay, comment as my boggart would be one of two things, snakes or losing my loved ones. Oh, my boggart ended up being the same as Jeremy and Abby. My adult self would be losing my loved ones, while my child self would be spiders and snakes, though I am still terrified of snakes. Oh, there you go. So, okay, almost done here. My next question is, what do you think of time travel introduced? Couldn't they have used that in future novels? I mean, that's one of the problems. I was talking about Star Trek IV with Tom this week, and in that movie they introduced time travel, and it feels like sometimes it creates a problem, because why wouldn't they use it a lot of other times? Why wouldn't they use it to go back and help Lily and James, or why wouldn't they, there's
or go kill Voldemort before he becomes powerful.
Yeah, or why wouldn't they, stop Lupin and Tonks from getting killed, or there's just so many things that if you had the access to time travel, you wouldn't use it to take more classes.
Right.
Now, here's a question about the time turner. Is my understanding is you wind it back and you'll go back a certain amount of time in the past, but I don't recall a time when anybody was able to wind it forward. So, like, for example, if you go back in the past, it seems like you have to live all the moments back up to where you wound it. But like, if you went back years, I don't remember if they said anything about, oh, you can just wind it back and you come back forward that number of years.
That's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, and the way it's seen in the film, it's like nothing actually changes. I mean, the stuff that Harry and Hermione do to go help their past selves have already happened from what we've seen in the film. So it's like I'm not sure if it's called a stable time loop. Basically, what happens when you go back in time and do something is what always happens. So really, you're not changing anything.
That's true, and they made that comment as we didn't change anything, and I don't remember if they made the comment in the movie or the book, but I remember that.
Yeah. And also, I think Rowling actually has one of some of the same ideas that you had, Rachel, about why don't they just use time travel for these things, and that's why in the Order of the Phoenix, when they get into the Department of Mysteries, she has them smash all the time turners, so they can't do anything with them anymore.
Why? Why do you think they do that? Why wouldn't you want to use it to?
Well, it's an accident. They just get into a big fight with computers, and then they go in this room with the time turners are kept, and they all get smashed.
Oh, okay.
And Rowling did that so she wouldn't have to think about time travel anymore.
Yeah, both the good and evil could use that to mess things up. So probably better just get rid of it.
Okay. All right. So my last question is, do you buy Sirius being the good guy all along after being the villain for the majority of the film? Does it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a misunderstanding is what it is. And misunderstandings happen all the time that make things look different than they really are.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does look like a bad guy, yeah. And he's, from what we've been saying before, he's not quite all there now. After he's been through hell, and he's desperately wanting revenge on the guy who put him in hell. And so he is acting like a bit of a bad guy, but his reasons for that are sound, and he's able to show once we actually meet him face to face that he does have this caring side as well, and his motivations are good towards Harry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see the same. You get this reaction from the kids when they're in the Shrieking Shack, and they're just completely betrayed when Lupin stands up beside Sirius, and it's like, hey, old friend, and they're like, you're in on it too, and you can just see like how well they sold the bad guy thing. But I also think it's a tribute to Lupin that as soon as he saw Pettigrew's name on the map, he pieced together the whole thing and realized that Sirius was innocent without having to talk to him.
Yeah, except they don't bother with us in the film. They don't mention how Lupin knew that they were there, do they?
No, I don't think they did.
I did like Snape's comment about how they bicker like an old married couple.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the most popular gay pairings in the Harry Potter fan fiction, Lupin and Sirius.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
I mostly, since I forgot to mention it earlier with the character question, but Alan Rickman was just really great in this.
Oh, yeah.
I think he did a great job with the role throughout the films, and this one just, I don't know, I just hear him saying 394 over and over and over, and it's just, I don't know, I really like him, and even when he has the scene where he comes out of the cabinet as the boggart and he's put in the grandmother's clothes, he just does it really well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really our first sort of most complex character with Sirius, you know, like showing how it's not always just going to be good guys and bad guys, that there are going to be people that are going to be sort of in between, or at least we're not going to be sure, or, you know, that are going to surprise us. I think that adds sort of a complexity to the whole series that you hadn't had before. It was more clear cut, good guys and bad guys.
And that's actually this is an appropriate point to introduce that with the kids being teenagers, because we're kind of seeing it from their point of view, and they're finally able to see this isn't all black and white. This isn't all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gray in between.
And in the next film and book, you'll see a character who's virtually the opposite that you think is good all along, and then you find out truly there's a different thing going on. Anyway, yeah. That's
sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
So yeah, another comment. Yeah, poor Timothy Spall and Imelda Staunton. Peter Pettigrew is described as rat-like, and Dolores Umbridge is described by Harry and Ron to look like a toad. So there you go.
You don't get that much of Umbridge though. She does still look fairly human in the film.
Yeah. Okay, so that was all my questions. Did anyone else have any other questions or thoughts or things you wanted to talk about with the film?
No, not really. We covered it all.
Covered it all? Okay. So the next movie is we're gonna have to we'll figure out when we're gonna meet. I'm gonna be gone the first 2 weeks of July, so we'll just have to figure that out and let everybody know when it works for everybody. Sorry again for the delays this month, but I really enjoyed talking about this, and I thank you guys so much for joining me. And if you guys just want to share with people where they can find you, starting with Abby, do you want to start?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Abby_kid and on Instagram at the same thing, I think. I'm not really sure. And and we have a blog that's jeremyandabbyadopt.wordpress.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Jeremy_kid.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter for PNE Richard, and my blog is velociraptor256.wordpress.com.
Great. Yes, and you can find me at Smiling LDS Girl and 54DisneyReviews.com and on all social media. And yeah, so thanks so much, you guys. And I'll have all that in the description section. And we'll talk again next month.
Okay.
Okay.